Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the bell for new stories. Max Anders had never been one to believe in the impossible. A seasoned engineer, he had spent most of his life fixing machines, designing systems, and occasionally tinkering with ideas that others would dismiss as impractical. But nothing in his career had prepared him for what happened one crisp autumn evening. Max was alone in his workshop, a small, cluttered cabin just outside the sleepy town of Oak Ridge. The room smelled faintly of metal and oil, the hum of a computer monitor the only sound breaking the otherwise peaceful silence. His workbench was cluttered with half-finished projects, an old radio receiver, a disassembled drone, and several mechanical prototypes. Max had always loved the challenge of taking things apart, figuring out how they worked, and making them better. As he adjusted a circuit board, a sudden flicker of light outside caught his attention. At first, he thought it was just the streetlights coming on. But the light was different. It wasn't the warm glow of street lamps. It was bright, almost unnatural, and it seemed to pulse in the sky. Max stood up, wiping his hands on his work pants as he peered out the small window. What he saw made his heart skip a beat. A trail of fiery light streaked across the darkening sky, a blazing comet that seemed to come from nowhere. It grew larger with each passing second, and Max's mind raced. Was it a meteor? A plane on fire? His curiosity got the best of him, and without thinking, he grabbed his jacket and rushed outside. The cool evening air hit him like a wall, and he looked up at the sky, his eyes squinting against the blinding light. The fiery streak was no longer just a trail, it was a massive object, descending toward Earth with a speed and precision that defied reason. Max's breath caught in his throat as he watched the craft grow larger, its shape becoming clearer. It wasn't a meteor. It was something else. Something alien. The object seemed to slow as it approached the ground, hovering just above the field behind his workshop. Max stood frozen, unable to look away. Then, with an eerie hum, the craft landed. A low vibration rumbled through the earth beneath his feet. The ground seemed to pulse as if responding to the presence of the craft. It was as if the very air had changed, thick with an energy that Max couldn't comprehend. His instincts screamed at him to run, but he didn't move. The silence that followed was deafening. The light from the craft cast long shadows, and for a moment, Max wondered if he had somehow fallen into a dream. But it wasn't a dream. The craft's door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a figure standing at the entrance. She stepped out slowly, and Max's breath caught in his throat. The woman was tall, almost impossibly so, her skin shimmering with an ethereal glow. Her long hair flowed like liquid silver, catching the light of the craft's engines. But it was her eyes that truly struck him, violet, glowing with an intensity that pierced straight through him, as if she could see into his very soul. Max stumbled back, his heart racing. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The woman took a step toward him, and he could feel the air around him change. "You are Max Anders," she said, her voice not in his ears, but in his mind. It was calm and melodic, yet urgent, as if every word carried the weight of the universe. "I have come to find you. You are my only hope." Max blinked in confusion, his pulse pounding in his ears. He couldn't process what was happening. His mind screamed at him that this was impossible. Aliens weren't real. They couldn't be. Yet here she was, standing before him. "I don't understand," Max said aloud, his voice shaky. "Who are you? What do you want with me?" The woman's gaze softened, and she stepped closer. Her presence was overwhelming, like the pull of gravity, he couldn't help but feel drawn to her. "My name is Karen," she said, her voice still resonating in his mind. "I come from a planet far beyond your stars, from a civilization in great danger. I have traveled across galaxies to find you, Max, because you are the only one who can help us." Max took an instinctive step back, his mind reeling. "What do you mean? I'm just a guy. A mechanic. I don't know anything about saving planets. Her violet eyes never left his face, and for the first time, Max felt the weight of her words. It was as if she could see everything he was thinking, his every doubt, every fear. You don't yet understand, but you will, Karen said, her voice gentle but insistent. You are the key to saving my people. Your mind, your ability to think outside the boundaries of your world, is the only hope we have. Max blinked, trying to gather his thoughts. I'm not a hero. I'm not equipped for something like this. You must have the wrong person. She shook her head slowly, and Max felt a deep, unshakable certainty in her words. You don't understand, Max. The warlord who threatens my people has discovered a way to harness an energy so powerful that it can destroy entire worlds. My civilization has tried everything to stop him, but our technology, our knowledge, is insufficient. The weapon he has created cannot be stopped by anyone from my world. But it can be stopped by someone from yours. Someone with the ingenuity to solve problems that we cannot even begin to comprehend. Max's heart raced. His mind screamed at him to run, to get as far away from this situation as possible, but something deep inside him told him to stay. Why me? He asked, barely able to make his voice steady. I'm just a guy who fixes things. I'm not. You are a creator, Max, Karen interrupted, her eyes burning with intensity. You see the world not for what it is, but for what it could be. You will understand the technology that we cannot. I've seen it in you. Your potential. Max stared at her, his breath shallow. He wanted to laugh, to tell her it was all a mistake, but the way she looked at him, the unwavering certainty in her eyes, stopped him cold. Please, Max, Karen pleaded. My people are dying. We are running out of time. You are the only one who can stop him. The weight of her words pressed down on him, and for a moment, Max could do nothing but stand there, overwhelmed by the impossible reality in front of him. He had no idea how he could possibly help, but deep down, something told him that if he didn't, the consequences would be far worse than he could ever imagine. I don't know what I can do, he whispered, his voice barely audible. But I'll try. I'll help you. Karen smiled, the tension in her face easing for the first time since they'd met. You have made the right choice, she said softly. I will take you to my ship. The journey ahead will be long, but together, we can save my people. As she turned to lead him toward her craft, Max felt a surge of both fear and determination rise within him. He had no idea what awaited him on the other side of the stars, but he knew one thing for certain, his life would never be the same again. Max's heart was still racing as he followed Karen toward the ship, trying to make sense of everything that had just transpired. His mind felt like a tangled mess of disbelief and confusion, but he couldn't deny the weight of her words, the urgency in her voice. She moved with grace, almost gliding toward the vessel, and Max found himself struggling to keep pace. The ship, a sleek, silvery craft that seemed to shimmer in the moonlight, sat motionless in the field. It looked like something from a science fiction movie, except it was real, and it was right in front of him. Karen turned back to him, her violet eyes filled with a deep understanding, as if she knew exactly what he was feeling. You're wondering how this is possible, she said, her voice soft but resolute. Max couldn't stop himself from nodding. This is. I mean, how can this even be happening? How are you even here? She gave him a slight smile, a reassuring expression that seemed to put him at ease, even if only for a moment. There is much I could explain, but it would take too long. The truth is that your planet, Earth, is more important than you realize. And you, Max, are more important than you think. Max stopped in his tracks, his mind still reeling. Wait, hold on, he said, holding up a hand. You're telling me that the fate of your entire civilization is riding on me? Just me. I'm just a guy who fixes things. I've never even. Listen to me, Max, she interrupted, turning to face him fully. You are a creator. That is why you're the only one who can help. My people have tried everything, but our minds are constrained by the very technologies we've developed. You, as a human, can think differently. You're not limited by what we know. Max stared at her, the weight of her words beginning to settle in. He didn't understand. There had to be some mistake. How could a simple engineer from Earth possibly save an entire civilization? But Karen's unwavering gaze held him, urging him to listen. Come with me, she said gently, gesturing toward the ship. I will show you why we need you. Max followed her without protest, his feet almost moving on their own as he stepped onto the ship. The moment he crossed the threshold, a strange sensation washed over him, like the air had thickened and the weight of the world was somehow lifted from his shoulders. Inside the ship, the walls glowed softly with a pale blue light, and the faint hum of unfamiliar technology filled the air. The space was larger than it seemed from the outside, far more expansive than Max could have imagined. Karen led him to a circular chamber in the heart of the ship, a control room filled with strange, alien instruments. There was no obvious control panel, just a series of floating holographic interfaces and screens that displayed star maps, energy readings, and symbols Max couldn't begin to comprehend. She gestured for him to take a seat in a chair that appeared to mold itself to his form the moment he sat down. The seat was surprisingly comfortable, though it was unlike anything Max had ever encountered. It was as if the chair itself had been designed specifically for him. I know this must be overwhelming, Karen said, her voice soothing. But you need to understand the gravity of what's happening. My people are facing an existential threat. A warlord, Zoreth, has gained control of a powerful energy source that we cannot counter. This energy, called Ethernite, is unlike anything your scientists would recognize. It has the power to distort reality itself, to bend time and space. Max listened intently, his mind struggling to keep up. Wait, Ethernite? That sounds like something out of a bad science fiction novel. What exactly is it? And how did this Zoreth guy get his hands on it? Karen's eyes darkened. Ethernite is the essence of the universe itself, a pure form of energy that can be harnessed to alter the very fabric of existence. It is the core of my people's technology, but we have never fully understood its true potential, until now. Zoreth discovered its location through an ancient artifact that had been hidden for millennia. Once he found it, he realized that with Ethernite, he could control the fate of entire worlds. His thirst for power is limitless. And now he is using it to destroy my people. Max's mind raced as he absorbed this new information. So, Zoreth is using this energy to destroy planets? Yes, Karen replied. And my world, Niren, is the next target. Zoreth has already begun to deploy his weapon, an energy cannon that can obliterate entire cities in a single strike. My people are defenseless against it. We have tried to fight back, but the power of Ethernite is beyond anything we've encountered. Max leaned forward, his brow furrowed in thought. And you think I can stop it? She nodded, her expression serious. You can. You must. The weapon that Zoreth has created is connected to a massive energy core that powers it. The core is linked to the Ethernite, and it is the only thing that can be shut down. But no one from my world can do it. The technology is too complex, the systems too alien to us. But you, Max, you have the ability to think differently. You can understand it. You can find a way. Max swallowed hard. This was insane. A part of him wanted to laugh, to run away and pretend none of this was happening. But another part of him, the part that had always craved something greater than the mundane, felt a pull he couldn't ignore. I don't know if I can do this, he said quietly. I'm just a guy who fixes broken machines. I've never faced anything like this. Karen's voice was gentle but insistent. I believe in you, Max. I've seen your potential. You have what we need to stop Zoreth. You must believe in yourself as well. Max stared at her, her words echoing in his mind. He didn't feel like the hero she seemed to think he was. He didn't feel like anything more than a guy who fixed things in a small workshop. But as he looked into Karen's eyes that held the weight of an entire civilization's survival, he knew that he couldn't walk away from this. "Okay," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll try. I'll help you." Karen smiled, a look of relief washing over her face. "Thank you, Max. You don't know how much this means to me, to all of us." Max nodded, still unsure of what he had just agreed to. But the resolve in Karen's eyes told him this was no ordinary situation. This wasn't just about saving her planet, it was about saving everything. As the ship hummed to life, Max felt a strange sense of determination settle in his chest. The stars outside the window seemed to stretch infinitely, and for the first time in his life, Max realized that he was about to embark on a journey that would change everything. He had no idea how he would do it, but somehow, he knew that if he didn't, everything he knew, everything he had ever taken for granted, would be lost forever. And so, with Karen by his side, Max Anders set off toward the unknown, toward a destiny that could not be denied. The journey from Earth to Niren was unlike anything Max could have imagined. Karen had told him the trip would take several days, but the sheer scale of space, the vast expanse of stars, made time feel both irrelevant and endless. The ship, which she called Alara, moved through the cosmos at unimaginable speeds, her energy systems tapping into an unknown form of propulsion that seemed to bend space itself. Inside the ship, the atmosphere was oddly comfortable, almost like a high-tech sanctuary. The soft blue lights, the faint hum of alien machinery, and the delicate metallic scent filled the air, creating a sense of calm even as Max's mind raced. He spent most of his time in the ship's command room, where Karen had shown him how to interface with the ship's systems. The technology was far beyond anything he had ever seen on Earth, yet, somehow, he could understand it. The holographic interfaces responded to his touch with fluidity, and though he couldn't yet decipher all of the information displayed, he could feel the logic of the systems beneath the surface. Karen had taken a more active role in guiding him, showing him the areas of the ship that would be useful in their mission. But even she seemed to be holding something back, as though she didn't want to reveal everything just yet. There were moments when she would look at him with a mixture of hope and uncertainty, as if silently urging him to rise to the occasion. Max tried not to think too much about the responsibility that weighed on him. The enormity of the task still loomed over him, but he couldn't afford to focus on his fear. Not when a whole civilization depended on him. He had been through challenging problems before, but nothing like this. He wasn't just fixing machines anymore, he was facing the possibility of saving an entire planet. As the days passed, Max spent more time poring over the ship's systems, trying to familiarize himself with the ship's layout and understanding the alien technology. He tried asking Karen more about Zorith, but each time, she avoided answering directly. Instead, she would speak about the energy weapon he had created, about the devastation it could cause, and about how desperately her people needed his help. Finally, on the fourth day of their journey, Karen approached him in the ship's central hub, a large room filled with star maps and shifting holographic displays. The stars seemed to move with a life of their own, swirling in intricate patterns, the distant planets and nebulae stretching out before him. He was starting to feel like a part of this strange, intergalactic journey, like he belonged here. "Max," she began, her voice softer than usual. "We are approaching Niren. The mission will begin soon." Max nodded, swallowing the knot that had formed in his throat. He had been waiting for this moment, but now that it was here, he couldn't shake the feeling of dread settling in his chest. The fate of her people, and perhaps the entire galaxy, was in his hands. "We're almost there," Karen continued, her violet eyes meeting his with quiet intensity. "The weapon Zorith has built is a near-perfect system. It harnesses the power of Aethernite in a way no one could have predicted. My people tried to counter it, but we are too bound by our own technology. That is why we need you." Max leaned against the central console, running his hands through his hair. "What exactly do you need me to do?" I'm still not entirely sure how this Ethernight thing works, or even how I can help. Karen's gaze softened as she walked closer. That's the problem, Max. You don't need to understand everything about Ethernight to stop Zoreth. But you must understand this, the weapon he created is not just a destructive force, it is a symbol of control. Zoreth wants to reshape the galaxy, bending it to his will. The weapon can destabilize entire star systems, and he intends to use it to conquer everything. Max's mind was still spinning. And you think I can shut this thing down? His voice was barely a whisper, doubt creeping into his tone despite his best efforts to stay focused. Yes, Karen replied, her voice unwavering. The key to stopping him lies within the energy core of his weapon. It's complex, much more so than anything we've encountered. But I believe you can do it. You think differently, Max. That's why you're the only one who can fix it. Before Max could respond, a soft chime sounded throughout the ship, followed by a voice from the ship's system. Approaching Niren. All systems are ready for entry. Max looked at Karen, his heart pounding. This is it. Karen nodded, her face hardening with determination. Yes, this is where it gets dangerous. The ship shuddered as it entered Niren's atmosphere. Max felt a strange tug in his stomach, as if the entire universe were being pulled toward a singular point. Outside the window, the surface of Niren came into view, vast oceans of blue and green, interrupted by continents filled with sprawling cities and alien landscapes. But despite the beauty of the planet, a deep sense of unease settled over him. He knew what was at stake. They passed through the planet's atmosphere, descending toward a large city situated on the coast, its futuristic skyline a stark contrast to Earth's more rustic cities. Niren's cities were breathtaking, designed with a harmony that blended technology and nature seamlessly. But as they neared the capital, Max could see the signs of war, burnt-out buildings, craters in the ground, and the shadow of a massive fortress looming on the horizon. That's where Zoratha's weapon is located, Karen said quietly, her eyes narrowing as she looked out the window. The city of Irindel. It is the heart of the warlord's empire. Max's throat tightened as they descended closer. The gravity of the situation felt so much more real now. It wasn't just an idea, it was tangible. Zoreth was there, in that city, and everything Karen had told him was true. This wasn't just a fight for a planet, it was a battle for the future of the entire galaxy. The Alara landed with a soft thud in a secluded area just outside the city. The hatch opened with a hiss, and Max stepped out into the cool, alien air. The landscape around him was eerily quiet. He could hear the distant rumble of artillery, the faint sounds of destruction echoing across the landscape. It was clear that Zoratha's reign of terror had taken its toll. Karen led him toward a hidden entrance into the city, her posture straight and determined. Max felt a chill run down his spine as they approached the city's outer walls, the sense of danger more palpable now than ever before. Zoreth will know we're here, Karen said as they moved quickly, her eyes scanning the surroundings. We'll have to be careful. Max nodded, his hands trembling despite his attempts to steady himself. This was it. He had no idea how they were going to do this, but he knew one thing for sure, he couldn't turn back now. Not when Karen had placed so much faith in him. As they entered the city, the weight of the task ahead began to feel more real. It wasn't just about saving Karen's people, it was about saving everything. The silence of Irindel was deafening. The city, once a beacon of prosperity and innovation, was now a ghost town. As Max and Karen moved deeper into the city, the remnants of its former glory were evident in the crumbling facades of towering buildings. Flickering lights from damaged street lamps cast eerie shadows across the deserted streets, and the occasional rumble of distant explosions reminded them that Zoratha's war machine was relentless. Max could feel the weight of Karen's presence beside him. She was moving with purpose, but there was a quiet tension in the air that even her calm demeanor couldn't mask. She knew what was at stake. And Max, despite all his doubts, was beginning to understand that he was at the center of something much larger than himself. "We need to get to the core," Karen whispered, her eyes scanning the darkened city. "Zoratha's weapon is housed in a fortress beneath the central spire. If we're going to stop him, we have to shut down the Ethernight core that powers it." Max nodded, though his mind was spinning. Ethernight. The key to everything. He still didn't fully understand how the energy worked, but Karen had explained enough for him to know that its power was both a blessing and a curse. Zorath had found a way to harness it, and now he was using it to reshape the galaxy in his image. As they navigated the labyrinthine streets, the atmosphere grew heavier. It wasn't just the destruction or the threat of Zoratha's weapon, it was the feeling that they were being watched. Max's skin prickled with the sensation of unseen eyes on him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. Karen seemed to sense his unease. "Stay close," she murmured. "We're entering a more dangerous part of the city. Zoratha's forces patrol here constantly." They turned a corner, and Max felt his stomach drop. Standing before them was a group of soldiers, darkly armored and armed with weapons that hummed with energy. Their helmets were featureless, their eyes hidden beneath a visor that glowed with a menacing red hue. They were not human, not even close. Their skin was a dark shade of green, their limbs long and unnaturally angular. They were the soldiers of Zorath, genetically altered warriors, bred for obedience and destruction. Karen's hand shot out, pulling Max back into the shadows just as the soldiers passed by. Their footsteps echoed down the street, and Max could feel his heart racing in his chest. He wasn't a soldier, he was just a guy who fixed things. But this was no time for hesitation. They had to keep moving. "Stay low," Karen whispered, her voice barely audible over the sounds of the soldiers' patrol. "We can't afford to be caught." Max nodded, trying to steady his breathing as they moved silently through the alleyways. The soldiers were close, but Karen's guidance kept them just out of sight. Her movements were fluid, almost predatory, as though she had spent years evading danger. Max, on the other hand, was less graceful, his shoes scraping against the rough concrete of the city's underbelly. They ducked behind a broken pillar as the soldiers rounded a corner, their voices a low murmur as they conversed in an alien language. Max couldn't understand it, but the tone was harsh, filled with authority and threat. He glanced at Karen, who was staring intently at the soldiers, her expression unreadable. "Zoratha's soldiers are everywhere," she said, once they were sure the soldiers had passed. "We need to be even more careful from here on out." Max's pulse was still racing. He didn't think he'd ever been this scared in his life, but he couldn't back down. Not now. Not when everything depended on him. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "Where exactly are we going?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady despite the knot in his throat. "To the spire," Karen replied. "It's the tallest building in the city. From there, we can access the underground facilities where Zorath has set up his weapon." Max looked up at the towering structure in the distance. It loomed over the city like a sentinel, its jagged edges piercing the dark sky. He couldn't see it clearly from this distance, but he knew that the deeper they went, the more dangerous it would get. They moved quickly but quietly, weaving through the ruins of the city. Max's eyes darted to every corner, every alley, every building, his senses on high alert. The feeling of being watched never left him, and it only grew stronger as they approached the base of the spire. The closer they got, the more the city felt like a tomb. The air was thick with the scent of dust and decay, and every step seemed to echo louder than the last. It was a haunting silence, broken only by the occasional distant explosion or the hum of Zoratha's energy weapons. "We're almost there," Karen said, her voice tight with anticipation. "We need to get inside the spire before Zorath realizes we're here." Max nodded, but his thoughts were racing. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was a trap, that Zorath was already waiting for them. But if they didn't go in, if they didn't take the chance now, the weapon would soon be operational, and they would have no chance to stop it. They reached the base of the spire, a massive structure made of smooth black metal that seemed to absorb the surrounding light. There were no windows, no signs of life, just a single large entrance that seemed to beckon them forward. "This is it," Karen whispered, turning to Max. "Stay close. We don't know what we're going to find inside." Max felt his stomach twist. They were on the brink of something monumental, but the reality of the situation was hitting him harder than he had anticipated. This wasn't just about stopping a weapon, it was about facing an enemy who had already proven his ruthlessness. Zorith wasn't just a warlord, he was a force of nature, a being who had mastered the power of Aethernight in ways that no one had imagined. Karen stepped forward, her eyes scanning the entrance. She didn't hesitate, her hand brushing against a hidden control panel beside the door. With a soft hiss, the massive door slid open, revealing a dark interior. Max followed her inside, the door closing silently behind them. The inside of the spire was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from the faint glow of control panels and the occasional flicker of malfunctioning lights. The walls were lined with alien symbols, and the air felt charged with an unnatural energy. It was as if the building itself was alive, pulsing with the power of Aethernight. "We need to find the core," Karen said, her voice a mix of urgency and resolve. "Once we reach it, I can help you interface with it." Max nodded, though his mind was already working through the problem. He had no idea what kind of technology they would encounter inside, but he couldn't afford to second-guess himself. He had to trust that he could figure it out, just like he always had with machines. They moved deeper into the spire, their footsteps echoing through the halls. As they rounded a corner, Max froze. Ahead of them stood a group of Zoritha's soldiers, more than a dozen of them, armed and ready for combat. Karen's eyes flicked to Max, her hand subtly reaching for a weapon at her side. "We have no choice. We fight." Max's heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing. They had come this far, but now they were about to face the soldiers of Zorith, and failure wasn't an option. Without thinking, Max stepped forward, determination hardening in his chest. This was it. The moment had come. And he wasn't going to let Karen, or anyone, down. The soldiers were close now, their weapons glowing ominously in the dim light of the spire. Max's breath caught in his throat as Karen readied herself, her stance perfect, a weapon already in hand. She wasn't just prepared to fight, she was born for it. Her alien combat training was evident in the fluid way she moved, her every motion precise and deadly. Max, on the other hand, felt his heart thundering in his chest. He was not a soldier. He wasn't even trained to fight. His talents lay in fixing things, solving problems, things that were mechanical, logical. But this? This was something else entirely. Karen glanced at him, her expression firm, but there was something else in her eyes too, something softer. A fleeting moment of reassurance before she snapped her attention back to the soldiers. "We have to move fast," she murmured. "I'll hold them off, but you need to get to the control room. It's just ahead." Max nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. Right. The control room. He had no idea what to expect beyond that door, but there was no time to hesitate. He couldn't afford to think about the stakes anymore. If he failed here, everything they'd worked for would be lost. Karen moved like lightning. She fired once, the energy weapon in her hand disintegrating the first soldier in a blinding flash of light. The others reacted immediately, returning fire, but she was already on the move, ducking behind a wall, using the environment to her advantage. Max hesitated for a fraction of a second, watching her take down the soldiers with swift precision, before he snapped himself out of his daze. The moment Karen gave him a nod to move forward, Max bolted. His feet carried him down the hallway, the sounds of battle growing distant behind him. His mind raced, but there was one clear goal: get to the control room and interface with the Aethernight core. He wasn't sure how, but he had to do it. The hallway twisted and turned in disorienting patterns, the walls lined with alien symbols that seemed to shimmer faintly in the dark. As Max reached a massive, reinforced door at the end of the corridor, he saw a small panel beside it. Without thinking, he approached it, his fingers moving over the alien technology. The panel responded immediately, glowing softly, and a low hum filled the air. It was a simple security system, though complex by human standards. His hands moved almost instinctively as he manipulated the controls. He didn't understand the language of the system, but the logic beneath it was the same as any machine he had ever worked on: electrical systems, feedback loops, access points. Max's mind worked rapidly, recalling every broken-down machine he had ever repaired, every problem he had solved back on Earth. This was just another challenge. A bigger one, sure, but still a challenge. With a soft click, the door slid open, revealing a large, cavernous room. The air inside was thick with energy, he could feel it, a static charge that made his skin prickle. At the center of the room stood a massive pillar of Aethernite, glowing with an unnatural blue light. The energy was palpable, a deep hum vibrating through his bones as he approached the core. The Aethernite core was nothing like the technology he had encountered before. It seemed to pulse with life, as though it was both a machine and a living entity. Tendrils of energy snaked out from it, swirling around the room, and Max felt his heartbeat quicken. This was the source of Zoratha's weapon, the power that had the potential to destroy entire star systems. And now, it was within his reach. But it wasn't enough just to reach it, he had to stop it. Max closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. He wasn't sure what he was supposed to do, but Karen had said he could figure it out. She had faith in him. He couldn't let her down. He stepped closer to the core, reaching out a trembling hand toward the energy tendrils. As his fingers brushed against them, he felt a shock of energy course through his body, lighting up his entire nervous system. He gritted his teeth, trying to suppress the pain, and focused on the task at hand. The control panel before him was covered in alien symbols, none of which he could understand. But he didn't need to understand the language. He needed to understand the system. And as his fingers hovered over the interface, a strange sensation washed over him. It was as if the energy of the Aethernite was calling to him, like it recognized him somehow. Max's mind surged with clarity. He understood now. The core was connected to a neural network, a complex system that linked the weapon's power to Zoratha's control. It was like a machine, but also an organism, a living, breathing thing. The key was in disrupting its flow, severing the link between Zorath and the Aethernite energy. His fingers moved across the console, triggering a series of commands, each one more complex than the last. He was hacking the system, interfacing with the Aethernite the same way he had interfaced with countless machines back home. The difference was this wasn't just machinery. This was alien. And it was beyond anything he had ever encountered. But it was still a machine. Max's mind raced as the holographic interface flickered before him, the symbols flashing erratically as if the core was resisting him. He felt his pulse quicken as the system fought against his attempts to infiltrate it. But he wasn't giving up, not now, not when everything was on the line. He focused harder, his fingers moving faster. And then, like a switch had been flipped, everything clicked into place. The energy around him pulsed, and for a brief moment, Max felt a connection to the core, a fleeting sense of understanding, as if the machine and he were one. The Aethernite energy responded to his will, bending to his command as he worked to disrupt the flow of power. Suddenly, the hum of the core shifted. The once steady pulse of energy faltered, then sputtered. Max's heart raced as the interface before him flickered. He couldn't stop now. He had to finish what he had started. In that moment, he pushed all his doubts aside, every fear, every hesitation. He was no longer just a mechanic from Earth. He was something more now. He was the one who could save them all. The final command was entered, and with a deafening roar, the energy in the room erupted. The Aethernite core convulsed, its power destabilizing, and Max was thrown backward, landing hard against the floor as the ground shook beneath him. The core's blue light began to flicker wildly, its tendrils of energy snapping and dissipating. Max's head spun, his body aching from the force of the impact, but he could feel it, the system was collapsing. He had done it. He had stopped the weapon. But it wasn't over yet. Max struggled to his feet, his mind still reeling. He could hear footsteps approaching, Zoratha's soldiers, no doubt, drawn to the disruption in the core's energy. He had no time to waste. He had to get out of here. Karen, he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. He couldn't do this alone anymore. He had to find her. He had to make sure she was safe. With one last glance at the trembling core, Max bolted toward the exit. His heart pounded in his chest as he raced through the darkened halls, praying that Karen was still alive and that the mission wasn't a failure after all. He couldn't let her down. Not now. Not ever. Max's feet hit the cold, metallic floor with a heavy thud as he sprinted down the winding corridors of the spire. His head was spinning from the exertion, his body aching from the violent impact against the floor when he had been thrown backward by the unstable core. The hum of the Etherite energy still echoed in his bones, but the adrenaline coursing through his veins was louder, drowning out everything else. The door to the control room was still wide open behind him, but there was no time to look back. His breath came in ragged bursts as he pushed himself harder, his mind focused solely on finding Karen. He couldn't afford to waste any more time. Not with Zoratha's soldiers closing in, not with the core destabilizing. He turned another corner, nearly colliding with a group of guards. They were too fast for him, and before he could even react, they raised their weapons. A surge of panic hit him, but then, out of nowhere, a blast of energy shot past him, striking one of the guards in the chest. The soldier crumpled to the ground in a heap, disintegrated by the blast. Max. Karen's voice cut through the chaos. He turned just in time to see her emerge from the shadows, her eyes intense and fierce as always, a blaster rifle in her hands. Without hesitation, she shot again, taking down another soldier. The remaining guards scattered, trying to regroup, but Karen was already on the move. She didn't stop to check on him, her focus completely on the battle at hand. Max's heart thudded in his chest, a wave of relief flooding through him as he realized she was still alive. "Get moving," she shouted, her voice firm. Max nodded, pushing himself forward, his legs burning with the effort. As Karen cleared the path ahead, he followed her, every step carrying him closer to the exit, closer to the surface where they could escape. But the further they moved through the spire, the more the weight of their situation hit him. He had done what he came to do, he had shut down the Etherite core. But it hadn't been enough. Zoratha's soldiers were still on their tail, and the spire was coming down. "Karen, we have to go. Now." Max yelled, urgency creeping into his voice. Karen shot him a quick glance, her jaw clenched in determination. "I know. Just keep moving." They rounded another corner, but this time, they didn't encounter more soldiers. Instead, they found themselves facing a dead end, a massive reinforced door, sealed tight. Max's breath caught in his throat. What now? Karen didn't hesitate. She rushed to the door's control panel, her fingers flying over the alien console. The panel glowed for a moment, the symbols flickering in rapid succession as she worked. A loud mechanical hiss echoed through the corridor as the door began to slowly open. Behind them, the ground shook again, stronger this time, a deep, reverberating tremor that sent a jolt of fear through Max's chest. The spire was collapsing. Karen's eyes were sharp as she motioned for him to hurry. "We don't have much time." Max nodded and rushed through the doorway as it opened wide enough for him to slip through. The room on the other side was dimly lit, filled with the sharp tang of burning metal and smoke. The walls were covered in dark scorch marks, evidence of the chaos that had unfolded within the spire. "We need to find a way out," Max said, his voice hoarse. "Now." Karen paused, scanning the room. The door behind them was already starting to shut, and there was no other obvious way out. But Karen didn't seem to be worried. She was already moving toward a set of control panels embedded in the wall. "There's a transport bay nearby," she said, her eyes flickering over the panels as she accessed them. "I can get us there." Max looked around the room, his gaze scanning for any signs of movement. The last thing they needed was to be caught in a final ambush. But for the moment, the area seemed clear. He could feel the temperature rising, the air growing thicker as the spire's internal systems began to fail. "Just make it fast," Max urged. "I don't know how much longer this place is going to hold." "I'm working as quickly as I can," Karen replied, her voice calm, focused. She tapped a few more commands into the console, and after a tense moment, the panel lit up with a soft chime. "Done," she said, turning back to him. "We've got a transport waiting for us. It's not much, but it's enough to get us off this rock." Max exhaled sharply, relief washing over him in a rush. He didn't care what kind of ship it was, as long as it got them out of here. He glanced back toward the door, then back to Karen. "Lead the way." She didn't need further encouragement. Karen took off down a narrow hallway, her steps quick and sure. Max followed, his mind racing. The mission had been a success, he had shut down Zoratha's weapon. But they were far from safe. The spire was coming down around them, and Zorath wasn't going to let them escape without a fight. As they sprinted down the corridor, Max's mind kept returning to the Ethernight core. There was something he didn't fully understand, something about the energy that didn't sit right. He had interfaced with the core, yes, but it hadn't just shut down when he triggered the system. It had resisted him, fought him. And in the final moments, as the core had destabilized, Max had felt a strange sensation, a connection. It wasn't just the core's power, but something deeper, something more personal. He shook his head, trying to push the thought away. They didn't have time to dwell on it. They needed to focus on getting out of here. Karen led him through a series of winding hallways, the walls shaking with increasing intensity. The air was thick with dust now, the lights flickering as the spire began to buckle under the strain. Max could hear the distant sound of explosions, the structure's defenses failing, the building collapsing in on itself. Finally, Karen stopped in front of a large hangar bay door. It was closed, but a faint green light above it indicated that it was accessible. Karen moved toward it, swiping her hand over a small access panel. The door groaned as it began to rise, revealing a small, sleek ship sitting in the center of the bay. Max's breath caught in his throat as he looked at it. It was nothing like the sleek starfighters or military vessels he had imagined. It was a patchwork of strange materials, alien in origin, no doubt. The design was unfamiliar, but it looked functional. It didn't matter. "This is it," Karen said. "We need to move, now." Max nodded, stepping toward the ship. But as he did, a harsh, distorted voice crackled through the comm system. "Not so fast." Max froze. Zoratha's voice. And this time, it wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. "You've made a mistake," Zorath continued, his voice oozing with malice. "You think you can stop me? You think you can destroy the core? I am everywhere, Max. You cannot escape me." Max's heart sank. He had expected retaliation, but the weight of Zoratha's words hit him harder than he had anticipated. He wasn't just facing a warlord. He was facing something far worse, something that could reach into the very heart of their mission, into everything they had worked for. And in that moment, Max realized that their journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. "Get in!" Karen shouted, urgency in her voice. "We don't have time." Max nodded, barely processing her words as he jumped into the ship's cockpit. The doors slammed shut behind them, and the ship's engines roared to life. They were escaping, but the real battle was only just beginning. Max's hands gripped the controls as the ship shot out of the hangar, tearing through the atmosphere of the collapsing spire. The ship's engines hummed with an unnatural intensity, but even their roar couldn't drown out the ringing sound of Zoratha's words in his mind. "You cannot escape me." The ship rocked violently as debris from the collapsing structure tore through the air behind them, but Karen didn't flinch. She was already at a terminal in the back of the small cockpit, accessing the ship's systems and running diagnostics. "Status?" Max asked, trying to keep his voice steady, though his heart was pounding in his chest. "Shields are holding for now," Karen replied, her fingers flying across the holographic interface. Her face was tense, focused, but there was an unmistakable edge of worry in her eyes. "But we're running out of time. Zoratha's forces will be on us the second we break atmosphere. He'll send everything after us." Max's gaze flicked to the radar. In the distance, the spire was already falling apart, chunks of the massive structure breaking off and plummeting toward the planet below. But that was just the beginning. They had to get out of the system. And fast. "We need to reach the outer rim," Max said, his voice tight with urgency. "If we can jump to hyperspace before they catch us." "I know," Karen cut him off, her voice clipped. "But Zorath isn't going to let us go that easily. He'll send out his best fighters, and they won't hesitate to track us down." Max tightened his grip on the controls. "Then we'll make sure they don't get the chance." Karen shot him a glance, her brow furrowed. "You're not a fighter, Max. You're a mechanic. You're good at fixing things, but this is a whole different level." Max felt a flicker of frustration. He wasn't a soldier. He knew that. But he also knew one thing: he couldn't let Karen down. Not now. Not when they were so close. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said, his voice more determined than he felt. "We both will." The ship veered left as Karen activated a series of evasive maneuvers, throwing the craft into a sharp roll to avoid an incoming missile barrage. The first few shots missed, but the next came too close for comfort. Max's hands shook slightly as he swerved the ship, narrowly dodging the explosive force. Come on," Max muttered under his breath. His mind raced. This wasn't supposed to be how it ended. He wasn't supposed to be flying a ship, running from a warlord, and trying to save the galaxy. He was supposed to be fixing things. Solving problems. But this was different. The stakes had never been higher. "We've got incoming," Karen said, her voice calm despite the chaos. Her hands worked swiftly at her terminal, activating the ship's weapon systems. "They're deploying interceptors." Max glanced back at the radar. Small, fast-moving dots were closing in on them, Zoratha's personal fleet, their ships designed for speed and firepower. The interceptors were small, sleek fighters, but they packed a punch. Max swallowed, his throat dry. "How much longer until we can jump?" Karen's eyes flicked to the readout. 5 minutes, if we're lucky." "Then we don't have 5 minutes, Max said grimly. His fingers moved over the controls, instinctively reaching for the ship's weapon systems. He had no experience with this kind of thing, but desperation was a powerful motivator. "Max, what are you doing?" Karen's voice held a note of warning. "I'm going to buy us some time," he said, his gaze fixed on the approaching fleet. He didn't wait for Karen's reply. He had already flipped a switch, activating the ship's basic defensive weapons. The ship shuddered as a series of plasma blasts fired from the front, streaking through the vacuum of space toward the nearest interceptor. The first hit its target, but the second, no, the third, missed. Max didn't know exactly how to control the ship's weaponry, but he was learning fast. His hands moved with a new urgency as he adjusted the targeting system. Another blast came, this one grazing the ship's hull and sending the vessel into a violent spin. Max's stomach lurched as he struggled to regain control, but he could feel the ship beginning to respond to his touch, just a little more, a little harder, and they could break free. Karen was already back at her terminal, analyzing the incoming fire and plotting their course. "Max, we can't keep doing this. We have to go faster." He didn't need to hear her say it. He knew. He pushed the throttle forward, sending the ship barreling toward the outer edge of the planet's atmosphere. The interceptor fighters were closing in fast, their weapons charging as they fired again, peppering the shields with energy blasts. Max clenched his jaw, pushing the ship harder, faster. It felt like the universe itself was trying to crush them. For minutes, Karen called out, her voice sharp. Max was ready to scream in frustration. He was doing everything he could, but it didn't feel like enough. Zoratha's forces were everywhere, relentless, closing in. He had no way of knowing how long the shields would hold or if they could make it to the jump point in time. And then, as if the universe had decided to make things worse, a massive shadow passed over the ship, a capital ship, Zoratha's flagship, looming large above them. It had come from the depths of the spire's wreckage, and it was already deploying more interceptors, more ships, filling the space around them. The fight was no longer a chase, it was a battle. "We're not going to make it," Max said, his voice taut with panic. He could see it now, the overwhelming force, closing in from every direction. The flagship's guns were targeting them, and the interceptors were cutting off their path to escape. Karen's eyes hardened. She wasn't giving up. "Not now." "We're not giving up," she said, the words firm and final. Suddenly, a deep rumble shook the ship as the flagship fired a broadside, the force of it knocking the ship into a violent spin. Alarms blared, and Max struggled to regain control, his mind racing as the stars outside twisted and blurred. "We have no choice," Karen shouted, standing up from her terminal. She didn't look back as she grabbed Max's arm and pulled him toward the rear hatch. "We're making a run for it." Max's heart raced, his breath quickening. "What?" But Karen didn't answer. She was already unlocking the rear hatch and motioning for him to follow. The ship was falling apart around them, he could feel it, the ship groaning under the pressure. "We're boarding that ship," Karen said, her voice low and determined. Max's mind struggled to catch up. "You're crazy," he gasped. Karen smiled grimly. "If we can't outrun them, we'll face them head-on." She didn't wait for him to respond. As the hatch opened into the dark void of space, she grabbed his arm, and together, they leapt into the unknown. Max's heart slammed against his ribcage. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. This was the beginning of something far greater. And they had no choice but to face it, together. The cold vacuum of space surrounded them as Max and Karen launched into the unknown, hurtling toward Zoratha's flagship. The ship was huge, its sleek black hull a monolith against the starry expanse. But it wasn't the size of the vessel that made Max's stomach turn. It was the sheer, unfathomable danger that lay ahead. Karen's hand tightened around his wrist, her grip fierce as she propelled them through the void. She was the experienced one here, not him. Max's head spun as he tried to keep his bearings, but the chaos of the moment left little room for doubt or hesitation. The ship's rear hatch was already closing, leaving them no time to reconsider. The only way out was forward. They passed by the flagship's external shields, shimmering with energy, their rippling surface flashing with static. It was a barrier Max could never hope to penetrate with anything short of a full-on assault. But Karen wasn't thinking about shields. She was thinking about tactics. "Keep close," she shouted over the radio. "We're going for an access point." Max's mind raced as they neared the massive vessel. Their small, makeshift ship was nothing compared to Zoratha's flagship. But there was no turning back now. They had no other choice but to board, infiltrate, and find a way to stop Zoratha's wrath before it destroyed them all. A series of thrusters on the ship's underbelly fired to slow their approach, a last-ditch effort to avoid being vaporized by the flagship's defenses. Max's heart raced in sync with the pulses of the ship's engines, the sound of plasma cannons firing somewhere in the distance. Each blast felt like a hammer against his chest, every tremor making the next moment seem even more uncertain. Then, with a final burst of force, Karen pushed them against the hull of the flagship, slamming into it with a jarring thud. Max gasped, his body pressed against the cold, metallic surface. Karen didn't waste a second. She immediately pulled a small device from her belt, a lock breaker that would override the exterior security protocols. As she attached it to a hatch on the side of the vessel, Max tried to steady his breathing, knowing full well that if they didn't act fast, they would be torn apart by the flagship's guns or worse, hunted down by Zoratha's elite forces. The device hummed softly as it worked, and Max's mind raced as the countdown ticked away in the back of his mind. Would it be enough? Was this the right decision? Was he about to lead them both into the jaws of death? But then, with a metallic hiss, the hatch clicked open. Karen shot him a brief but determined look before she pushed the hatch wide and motioned for him to follow. Without hesitation, he stepped inside. The hallway beyond was dark, lit only by faint, dim emergency lights. It was quiet, almost too quiet. They had made it in undetected for the moment, but that wouldn't last. Zoratha's flagship was an enormous fortress, and there was no telling what kind of security it had. "Stay low," Karen whispered. "We move quickly, and we move together." Max nodded, his pulse hammering in his ears. The air inside the flagship smelled stale and cold, a sharp contrast to the heat of the ship's exterior. He adjusted to the dim light and moved closer to Karen as she led him down the hall, her steps silent but purposeful. They passed by several bulkhead doors, each sealed tight with no indication of what lay beyond. Karen seemed to know exactly where she was going, and Max followed without question. They couldn't afford to waste time. If they were going to stop Zorath, they had to act fast. They turned a corner, and Max nearly stumbled into Karen's back as she stopped suddenly. She was looking ahead, her expression unreadable. Ahead of them, a small group of Zoratha's soldiers patrolled the corridor, their boots clanging against the metal floor. They were armed, their faces obscured by the helmets of their black combat suits. The soldiers were speaking in hushed tones, unaware that Max and Karen were just around the corner. Karen's eyes flicked to Max, and she held up one hand in a silent command for him to stay quiet. She crouched low, blending into the shadows as she calculated their next move. Max mimicked her, his mind racing. He had no weapons, no training, he was just a mechanic, thrust into a situation that he couldn't have imagined in his worst nightmares. And yet, here he was. Karen's hand moved to the side of the wall, finding a small button hidden in a groove. She pressed it, and a series of strange symbols lit up on the wall in front of them. The symbols shifted, and with a low hiss, a hidden door opened silently, revealing a narrow passageway that ran parallel to the soldiers. Karen didn't hesitate. She gestured for Max to follow, and without another word, they slipped into the passageway. It was cramped, the walls lined with cables and conduits. Max's heart pounded in his chest, and for a moment, the sheer absurdity of their situation hit him. They were inside the heart of the enemy's flagship, fighting against impossible odds, with no guarantee of survival. "Keep moving," Karen urged, her voice barely above a whisper. Max nodded, his fear tempered by the sense of purpose that Karen's calm presence instilled in him. She was right. They had come this far. There was no turning back now. They moved through the passageway, barely making a sound, as the ship's interior came alive around them. The low hum of machinery echoed in the walls, and Max could feel the vibrations of distant explosions. The ship was under attack, but it was nothing compared to the storm that Zorath had planned for them. As they neared an access hatch to the lower levels, the sound of footsteps grew louder. More soldiers. Max's chest tightened. This was it. They were about to be discovered. Karen's hand shot out, pulling him behind a bulkhead as the soldiers passed. Her eyes were sharp, calculating every move. They had to act fast before they were caught in a full-scale firefight. They waited in silence as the soldiers passed, just a few feet away, oblivious to their presence. When they were gone, Karen motioned for Max to follow. They reached the lower levels, where the ship's power core was located, Zoratha's prize, the source of his control. It was there that Max would face his greatest challenge. The power core wasn't just a generator, it was a weapon. A weapon capable of destroying entire fleets, and more. The walls were lined with more soldiers, but Karen cut through them with a combination of speed and skill. She was like a shadow, always one step ahead. Max stayed close, following her lead, every sense alert as they approached the core room. When they finally reached the door, Karen turned to him. "This is it," she said, her voice low but resolute. "We destroy the core, we stop Zorath, and we escape. You ready?" Max nodded. His heart raced with a mix of fear and determination. This was their last chance. They couldn't afford to fail. Karen entered the code, and the door slid open. The power core loomed before them, bathed in eerie blue light. But something wasn't right. It pulsed with an unnatural rhythm, far more unstable than it should have been. "We've got company," Max muttered, turning just in time to see Zoratha's soldiers rushing toward them. But it was too late. They had already made their move. And the countdown had begun. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. For more exciting HFY stories. Your support means the world to us. And make sure to tap the bell icon, so you never miss an update. Stay tuned for our next adventure, and until then, keep exploring the stars. See you in the next video.